Though obviously not a single event, the Holocene mass extinction completely restructured life as it was once known. The neighbor, the red planet, the sibling dwarf. It's easy to say these places are where humanity built the ecosystem from scratch, but it's not entirely fair to strike its homeworld off that list. For over 3 decades before the tipping point, radical, substantive changes to the planet were inflicted. The southern hemisphere had a sudden and dramatic weakening of atmospheric levels. Emissions of greenhouse gases spiked, and the temperature rose with it. Trash piled up in ever more dangerous ways. To say humanity was blind is to be blind. They knew, and they tried to fix it, and they failed. Too little, too loose, too otherized. To many, the environment was separate, an agent that changes of its own accord, and one would have to be selfish or stupid to think that they could change it. They were wrong. The first Category 4 storm started in the Americas at the turn of the century. Category 4 was considered one step down from the highest threshold. It was truly extreme. The religious sincerely believed they were the wrath of God. How ironic that this was the calm before the real storm, the Category 5 that united the nation in mourning. It was soon matched by the next 5, and the next, and the next, and the next, and the next. Category 5 stands for catastrophic. It shifted to mean routine, annual. Storms that could transform cities or even islands into nothing more than blood, splinters, and watery schmears became mundane. The wrath of God became a footnote in nature. People believed nothing was going wrong, that the world just did that. It got hotter until every year was a record. It got dirtier until population centers became legitimate health risks. Still, people were ignorant. It looked like species just dying, a few glaciers melting. It wasn't insane to think it was natural. It looked natural. Looks, however, can be deceiving. Because when they looked back, it wasn't just species choking to death on trash. It was ecosystems being bleached from the bottom up. It was a mainstays for all of human history being cleared for livestock. It was a pattern of virulent fires, and city-sized, then country-sized chunks slipping from the ice sheets. Places humanity weren't even touching, dying off entirely and rapidly. It sounds impossible to say the tipping point was reached within a few decades of them noticing. Geological changes, die-offs, climate epochs, they're talked about in terms of thousands of years, usually tens of hundreds of thousands. Less than a century should have been impossible, right? Well, humanity has been known to tame the impossible. And tame it they did. It is impossible to state a single event, but it was the livestock. They ate half the crops, lived on cleared forests, and passed gas that heated things up. It was also the power plants, they pumped out gas too. It was the cars, it was the cooling units, it was the trash, the deforestation, the negligence. It was the disregard. Disregard that held up until the turning point, June 2019, the death of photosynthesis. You see, with a lot of heat comes a lot of deglaciation. Deglaciation releases more of the same gas that heat up the planet in the first place. Of course, some of that gas could have been absorbed by plants, but with many forests dead and not enough of every other substance necessary for photosynthesis, carbon dioxide absorption plateaued. The plants opened themselves up to the atmosphere less and less until it started to kill them. The ocean started to absorb the overflowing gas. Initially, that news would have been great. Greenhouse gases had overpowered their checks and balances and entered a cyclical loop of further release and further heating. This seemed like a mediator. Hopes turned to fear when that gas turned the oceans into an acid. That acid ate away at the phytoplankton, the primary producers of the sea and the primary reason for the planet's oxygen atmosphere. To say the least, it was apocalyptic. Small fish died off in droves. Rotting flesh and leaching plastic clogged the surface, and non-bleached ocean plants died off. Fish that ate plants, plankton, or smaller fish died. Fish that ate those died. Fish that relied on those fish died. Whales and other ocean mammals died. The fishing industry imploded, and land farming was plagued by carbon-drowned and dust-covered crops. Livestock couldn't be fed and died off too. Nearly 50% of all multicellular species alive in 2019 were extinct by 2024. It was then when humanity's excess was truly found. Even in the wake of all of this, humanity's resource gluttony left it with enough to feed itself. That being said, food wasn't the only concern. Deserts were growing. Storms were worsening. The sudden shift in how climate fronts interact led to erratic, unpredictable weather and indistinct seasons. Water sources dried up. Power grids failed. Around 2.7 billion people died directly as a result of the Holocene Extinction and its effects. It seemed like the worst imaginings came true and the world couldn't be saved anymore. Half of it was dead, and the dying couldn't be stopped. Not anymore. But we know it could be stopped because it was stopped. It may have taken much too long for the restructuring to happen, but it did. The same biofuels we use now were around in some form then. They had nuclear power and renewable types too. Regulations were enforced, new ones were made. Conservation and ecology became key values. Trash was picked up and fished. Species and forests receded. The major polluters and dumpers absolutely redirected themselves, changing to biodegrading products and hardy filters. They had the ability to mine what they needed cleanly, if only the effort, time, money, or even just care was applied, and they did. This may be history, but thankfully it is not hindsight. It is a shame that what amounts to trillions of life forms had to die before humanity changed from destroyers to builders, consumers to conservationists, and so on. However, we should be glad that the death of life as they knew it wasn't the death of life forever. It serves as a cautionary tale. Humans are part of an ecosystem and, now more than ever, an ecosystem impacted by their decisions. To ignore those two realities is to spit on the graves of every 13-billion-year-old lineage we, as a species, destroyed and downplay the new ones we've created.